gentlemen, let's get straight into it. 2 weeks ago, we had Phil Waugh on this show. We were talking up the broadcast deal. We asked him about the situation with finding Joe Schmidt's replacement as the Wallabies coach. He said within a fortnight. Today is the end of that fortnight. We still haven't had an announcement. So there seems to be a delay in some respect. Tom, can you shed any light on what's holding up the decision or the appointment for who takes over from Joe Schmidt?
Yeah, it's interesting times. I actually feel a bit for Phil there, given that he's tried to not put a timeline on it. I mean, we asked him last week at the AGM results, when is this announcement coming for Wallabies coach? Imminently, we were told, but all indications are it won't take place till next week. Obviously, we've had some public holidays thrown in there as well. Queensland Reds are digging their heels in. It's absolutely no secret that Rugby Australia is talking to the Reds about trying to acquire Les Kiss as the Wallabies coach from later this year. But, the Reds are negotiating and working out what's in it for them. Are they going to give up a coach who still has a year on his contract, early doors? So maybe that's why it's stalling as well. I don't know whether that plays into the Reds' hands or not. Even the Rugby Australia is pretty desperate to make a decision on this and have a bit of clarity on that front. But definitely going longer than RA would want at this stage.
I can see both sides here. You know, the Reds, if they are going to lose their head coach, who they're obviously very happy with, if he wasn't in the Wallabies frame, they'd probably be looking at extending him beyond 2026. And I can see, the Wallabies, if they're very keen on Les Kiss, trying to make this work. From the Reds' point of view, Matt, at what point do you, A, look after your own backyard, but also, B, realise perhaps what's better for the game, what's better for the Wallabies, what's better for Australian rugby here?
I know the Queensland Reds, they're a very independent organisation in terms of speaking with some of the administrators from the Reds in the past, they're very happy with what they're doing up there. Obviously, Les Kiss is a big part of that. Now, as Tom mentioned, they've got to let Les go out of a year early for him to take over this Wallabies job. Now, to me personally, as just a regular punter, does it bother me if we find out who the next Australian coach is in a month's time as opposed to today? Not really, because I know Joe Schmidt is at the helm right now, and I know Les Kiss. If he does get the job and everything, becomes sort of clear and he's the next in line. He'll take some advice from Joe and he'll go into camp and he'll see how it's all operational. But he'll want to put his own stamp on it anyway. I mean, he's a head coach and he's done the miles, he's coached overseas, he's back here, he's done wonderfully with the Reds. So I know it'll be a Les Kiss Australian side. So I'm not concerned about the timing of it. I just hope that it gets done because the Reds are losing an outstanding coach, an outstanding man and a great leader. I agree with Tom. Like, the Reds are probably sitting there thinking, well, you want us to give him up. Well, what are you going to do for us? And I can understand that.
Which it's a pretty simple contract law situation, right? You're multiple parties, willing parties, to negotiate a release scenario that's going to have benefit for all of them. Rugby Australia clearly identified their benefit. They want Les Kiss to coach the Wallabies. Les Kiss identified a benefit to be brought back to Australia and offered a position by the Reds to secure his coaching future because there was uncertainty on Les Kiss's horizon. He wasn't sure what was going on. He'd come out of the UK and there were some teams there that had gone into administration. So they offered him a 2-year binding contract, which is fine. So there was benefit there as well. So I think all of the parties are entitled to sit down and constructively work towards a solution, which is what they're doing. I think that trying to find a breakdown or some sort of notion that someone is refusing to engage positively is probably the wrong lens to put on it. I think that all parties are entitled to explore what contract law is and how to enter and exit. If third parties come in, Rugby Australia, they are wanting to break the terms of that arrangement and release Les Kiss from his terms to the Reds. If it was the other way around and Les Kiss had a poor season and the Reds were looking to terminate him early, he'd be exercising the fact that, there's all sorts of scenarios here.
Yeah,
I think we're in a positive scenario still.
Yep.
It seems to us, everyone, that Australia's identified a coach. That's a great piece of work. They've identified him early enough to have now a negotiation process and then have him available to spend time with the Wallaby squad before Joe Schmidt steps out of the position. I think that the timing of that now is just going to have to run through a process, and clearly that's in negotiation now.
What sort of Go on, you go, Tom.
All I'd say to that is in December, Phil Wall said we have contingency plans in place and we're working towards them if Joe Schmidt doesn't stay on board, and it's nearly in April. So
yeah, but he didn't say, that you know as well as I do that sometimes legal, contract law is not a simple decision on Monday night and a Tuesday solution. That takes a while to work out. There are lots of resource permutations, and Queensland Reds, they're within their rights to explore what it means to them now. Les Kiss, when he arrived at the Queensland Reds, is a vastly different commodity now to what he was. Now, what role did the Reds play in that as well? They built that squad around him, a lot of it around him, for him, and allocated resource at his direction to give him that sort of stability and platform to launch into an international category, Group 1 racing career now. So what does that mean to the Reds? So that means that they're probably exploring what it would mean to enter the market and get a coach of that calibre, of Les Kiss's calibre now, into run the Queensland Reds scenario with the same sort of authority and knowledge that he's got. That's a complicated process.
Well, and I'm not saying the Reds are not entitled to do what is best for them. Absolutely they are. And if they're going to let go a coach of the quality of Les Kiss, who they're extremely happy with a year early, then they want to make sure that they're taking care of themselves. I think most people would recognise that's fair.
So that's incorrect language. I don't think it's taking care of themselves or not letting someone go.
Just making sure they're not going to be left in the
Australian rugby
lurch.
is still, they're on record as saying that they, the high performance journey that they're in, they've signed some players, Harry Wilson, Fraser McWright notably, on long contracts, through next World Cup plans. They are assimilating into a Rugby Australia blueprint, So this idea, although the Queenslanders are a very special group of people, you've even loved
Mate, you're over there reading the financial
you're a
review.
Waratah
You're not better than
anyway.
me.
You don't care.
You're not better than
You don't care. So I think, look, it's probably just, we're all keen to celebrate the announcement because we're just keen to maintain momentum into
100%.
British Lifelines.
Has Les Kiss come out and stood in front of a camera and gone, I want to be the Wallabies coach?
No. He's played everything beautifully.
He asked him.
But how do we not know
3 times.
that behind the scenes, Les is like, well, look, I'm really happy here at the Reds. Like, if you want to get me out, you've got to come up with something. I mean, because I know he loves his players. Speaking to him in the environment, he just seems so at home coaching Queensland. He's got great relationships with his squad. How do we know it's not?
Mate, it's a negotiation.
Yeah,
it's just,
but on the
that
point
number
of
doesn't work for me. OK, well, how about this number? And then Rugby Australia will say, well, OK, well, what about this? And we provide this. And
But it's ultimately not Les Kiss's call right now because he's got a binding contract with Queensland, right?
Yeah.
So it's up to QAU and RA.
Well,
I just wonder whether RA, December, January, could have knocked on the door of the Reds and said, hey, if we go down this path,
what's it going to take?
what could it take? I'm not saying you've got to enter formal negotiations, but I just wonder whether we're in a position now that RA thought it was a lay down misère, they get Les Kiss out early.
On the point of negotiations, though,
Might not be Les Kiss, sorry. Might be support staff. There might be,
of course.
We might be,
Yeah.
On the point of support staff, my understanding is that'll come later. They're going to get to this head coach, get it done, as Tom said, likely next week. But you've mentioned the word negotiation, and that's totally what it is. What's reasonable or customary in this sort of situation, Justin?
I've never negotiated a role as a
if you've
head
got
coach.
a coach who's on contract, say, I'll just throw a figure out hypothetically, let's say he's on $500,000 a year. He's got one more year to run on that. Now, the Reds aren't going to be $500,000 out of pocket because he's leaving a year early, but they are entitled to ask for something to make sure that they're set up well enough to go and find.
Well, I think it's dangerous to start just arriving at a odometer count and a number. Okay, there's lots of different things around, coaching philosophy, style of the Reds, recruitment process, affinity with the current playing roster, the IP that Les Kiss has contributed to the Reds. What's that worth? The IP that the Reds have put into Les Kiss as well. Ground revenue, sponsorships, relationships. There's all sorts of different things. So it's a DNA map of the sort of person that they're going to have to enter the market in and get, and that absolutely carries a price tag. But it also carries a pretty complicated sort of matrix of how to find that person.
I was waiting for that
Matrix.
I knew you'd
Dichotomy,
get it. I knew
matrix,
you'd get it in.
hierarchy.
But yeah, I mean, you're right, because Les Kiss he's a Queensland Reds coach, but he's also a Queensland icon. So the relationships that he has externally from the Queensland Reds that he would have brought to the table, are certainly very, very valuable. So it wouldn't be a simple process.
The promptness of getting this decision done, though, or negotiation agreed to, is also in the Reds' best interest, right? Because if they need to go to market for a coach, which presumably is a matter of when, not if, they need to do it sooner rather than later because coaches start to become taken and unavailable.
But also, 2028, I know it's looking forward. What do you do in 2028? Like, I presume this contract is up until the Rugby World Cup for a Wallabies coach.
You mean the Wallabies coach?
Yeah. Now, Les Kiss probably has a new contract banked there at the Reds if he doesn't take the Wallabies gig.
That's right.
So if he doesn't coach the Wallabies after 27, where does that leave the Reds? Would they take him back? You know what I mean? It's all those...
Yeah, but, mate, we've also seen... contracts sometimes are exercised, they're enforced and other times they're not. When a coach is going very poorly, there's a constructive, that's
mutual agreement.
That's all that stuff, right? You resigned and moved on. But so, you enforce the rights of a contract when you've got something to lose, really, don't you? Or benefit to gain. So there are two ways to look at the lens here. I don't think that ultimately all of the parties are sitting around a table trying to shoot each other in the foot and walk away with a with a particularly confrontational agreement. Ultimately, everyone's going to walk away with an imperfect agreement. The important thing is, and what we're frustrated by, is the fact that there hasn't been an agreement yet. Clearly, there's some discussions still ongoing. Clearly, the Reds, Rugby Australia have zeroed in on Les Kiss because they're not offering anything else in the environment around, well, hang on, we're actually engaged with some other people, we might move on. We know Les Kiss is going to be the Wallaby coach.
Yeah.
Here's one for you both. If Les Kiss is appointed next week, hypothetically, should he go in Wallabies camp for the remainder of the Test season, or is it more important he stays at the Reds and sets them up for next year?
I think that might be the sticking point right now.
I think they
probably want
Schmidt, and if it's going to be Les, has to take over the Rugby Championship. Sorry, after the Rugby Championship. So you'd think they'd need to be part of the environment, given we do have this very positive handover situation.
I don't think they need to be part of the environment, and I don't know what your take on it. Like, how many coaches do that? Like, very few, if any.
That's because so often you see a coach sacked and so on. This is a handover situation.
I tell you from memory, the last time we did it in Australia was Rob McQueen
to Eddie Jones.
Which was the most successful period of Australian rugby.
You played in that time. Was there a handover period between Rod and Eddie? Did Eddie come in and spend a bit of time where they overlapped?
The little angry bloke went from being behind you to in front of you yelling at you. I noticed the transition then, let me tell you. But yeah, there was and then Eddie Jones coached Australia A, which had a multitude of players that played in the British Ice Line series as well, had familiarity there. So yeah, absolutely. I think it would be beneficial to have some sort of, job placement program and transfer.
So, continuing hypotheticals, Les Kiss's final game coaching the Reds could very well be July 2nd, Reds versus British and Irish Lions. Then, would it make sense to you, Gould, given Eddie coached Australia A during the Lions series in 2001, maybe Les is the head coach of the Australia-New Zealand 15?
Quite possibly, and just like we're talking about Joe Schmidt being able to not be the head coach but still have some sort of influence on the Australian program, there would be a period. I mean, Les Kiss isn't going to walk out the door and his car park pass is going to stop working at Ballymore. You could still have an involvement in sort of recruitment aspiration, making sure that he's moving things forward for that transitional period as well, so that it's not such an abrupt moment when he does reach agreement.
Yeah, well, next week is when we're expecting an announcement, but we've been told a few times now, fortnight, 2 weeks, 2 weeks.
The other person, the stakeholder that's important for is the players, right? I mean, there's still players in the Australian environment that are wanting to know who the head coach is to decide about, contract negotiations. There are players in the Reds that will want to know as well. There's pathway programs and academy programs that have been starting to adopt some of Les Kiss's ethos and or the Reds way. So that's very important as well. The engagement up there in the community.
And I'd be stunned if Kiss is appointed that Joe Schmidt isn't involved in some capacity through to the World Cup. I think, obviously we know their history and how they work together, so I think that will put some players at ease as well.
Yeah, well, that's one of the pieces of the puzzle leading up to the home World Cup for men's 15s rugby in 2027. We know